Hello and welcome. Shatter, co-created by the writer Peter B. Gillis and the artist Michael Saenz, is recognized as the first computer-generated comic book. However, that claim comes with a few caveats. The artwork was produced pixel by pixel on a first-generation Macintosh, as was the lettering, but that computer had a purely black and white screen that couldn't produce color, so the colors had to be done traditionally. Furthermore, between issues 3 and 7 of the ongoing series, the artwork was actually done on paper, then scanned in, with digital effects, shading, and lettering applied to it. Then it was printed out. So its intent was to emulate a computer-generated image and retain a sense of the digital process, but it wasn't strictly digital. Let's start at the beginning and look at the entire run of Shatter. According to Saenz, he was an early adopter of the Macintosh. What interested him was using a computer to streamline the artistic process. This way he could produce commercial artwork quicker, especially storyboarding, which was a tedious chore. At the time, he was doing both commercial illustrations for advertising and sporadic comic book work. Mostly, that comic book work appeared in Epic Illustrated. His short stories appeared in a number of issues between 1980 and 1984. During this time, Saenz started experimenting with purely digital graphics, hoping that Epic would publish the results. Unfortunately, those early efforts were not great, and the editor, Archie Goodwin, wasn't interested. Saenz persevered and continued to refine his computer-generated graphics. During this time, he developed a character he called Zero. This was a placeholder name for a character that would transform into Shatter. While he had written and drawn a number of stories, Saenz wasn't confident with his writing. So he contacted a local writer, Peter B. Gillis, to help him shape the world. They worked out the plot together, with Gillis adding certain elements and giving the character his name. New publisher, First Comics, was approached with the Shatter idea and shown the computer-generated pages. The editor, Mike Gold, who was a fan and user of the Macintosh, saw the potential in this new technology and gave the idea a chance. Shatter was then published as a one-shot special in 1985. Due to its novelty, it had a number of printings to cover distributor reorders. That said, it was also reported that Shatter only had one printing of 60,000 copies, which sold out. Either way, Shatter did quite well. Notably, a few months before that publication, a preview of Shatter debuted in the British magazine Big K. This black and white preview was actually pages that would appear in the forthcoming John Sable, not the one-shot special. If that wasn't Big K's final issue, Shatter would have become an ongoing feature. Presumably, it would have printed story segments that wouldn't be published by First Comics until months later. Removing the novelty from the equation, and the comic itself is just okay. As it's pointed out in future letter columns, Shatter borrows a lot from Blade Runner. And in my opinion, there's a healthy dose of William Gibson's cyberpunk classic, Neuromancer, or cyberpunk in general. The plot involves Shatter, a down-on-his-luck freelance cop using an assumed identity, who investigates a multiple murder. This leads him to a femme fatale known as Cyan. Naturally, Shatter is intrigued by her, but he has a job to do and a good paycheck to collect. So he investigates Cyan further, collecting evidence for a conviction, and then he attempts to arrest her. The arrest is interrupted by another freelance cop, and Cyan escapes. The issue ends without a resolution. The aesthetic borrowed from Blade Runner is hard to miss. Shatter being a jaded loner cop is also straight from Blade Runner. Even his vehicle design seems inspired by that movie. But you know, Saenz was neither the first nor the only person to use that futuristic dystopian look. The only difference is the scenes are drenched in warm orange tones, instead of stark earth tones accented with discordant neon. Likely the raw nature of the artwork required a brighter palette. Making it darker would have turned the artwork murky and hard to identify. It would have melted into the darkness. In my opinion, the William Gibson connection comes through the major plot beat of the story. Cyan's partner was an accomplished pianist who was kidnapped. His brain was mashed up, and that piano talent was refined into RNA information that could be injected into another person. That person now has that piano talent. Unfortunately, that talent will only last for a limited time. The The transfer of talent information reminds me of Gibson's work, where people rent out storage space in their brain. It's not a perfect comparison by any means. Considering the whole cyberpunk angle of this special and the remaining series, I have to think Gibson's writing had a certain level of influence. Overall, the futuristic story, which highlights a number of technological advances being illustrated on a computer, has a nice atmospheric touch. It doesn't look terrible, but it also doesn't look great. I'd classify it as a proof of concept type of thing more than anything. Shatter didn't immediately become a series. For 6 months, it ran as a backup feature in Mike Grell's John Sable, Freelance. This short series picks up immediately after the one-shot special and provides the context of the forthcoming series. In fact, I'd say it's essential to read before the ongoing series. The story involves Shatter encountering Cyan once again. She's part of an underground art movement that works against the evil corporation doing RNA research. Shatter joins this group in exchange for receiving more talents he can use. As we learn, Shatter's RNA is capable of taking a talent and making it a permanent ability instead of a temporary one, which makes his RNA unique and valuable. However, because she's a femme fatale, Cyan does a secret double deal and she sells out Shatter to the evil corporation. This is the plot thread picked up by the ongoing series. During this short run, the writer, Gillis, drops out of the series. Presumably, his work at Marvel was keeping him busy, and he didn't have time for this comic book experiment. Saenz would work solo as the ongoing series launched. While the one-shot special had some interesting bits, this backup feature has even better elements that contain a lot of potential, such as themes of identity theft and creativity versus corporate exploitation. Unfortunately, and this is a recurring theme, none of these ideas are developed. It's not an exaggeration to say the direction of this 14-issue series changes every 2 or 3 issues. That's because the series becomes a revolving door of creative people keeping the concept alive. Saenz would only do the first 2 issues and then disappear. In fact, with the exception of a few more projects, he basically left comics altogether, but we'll look at that a little later. After Saenz, the writer, Stephen Grant, and the artist, Steve Irwin, would take over. It's Irwin that produced traditional art that was scanned and enhanced with digital effects, so it wasn't a purely digital process for the next 4 issues. Grant left after 2 issues, and the original writer, Gillis, returned with a story that's a sudden reinterpretation of the concept. It doesn't ignore what preceded it, but it abruptly spins into a very different direction. It's like a course correction, where Gillis takes the series where he originally intended in a very inorganic way. Then he begins to burn through all the plot beats he gathered in a file. By issue 7, Irwin left, and the comic introduced the new artist, Paul Abrams, who was replaced the next issue by Charlie Athanas. Athanas would remain on the series until the final issue. Beginning with the 7th issue, the covers proclaim Shatter was the first computerized comic. A blurb on the inside cover explained the hardware and software used to produce it. Anyway, the artwork inside once again reflects a purely digital process. The lines are thin and choppy, as one might expect, and there are a lot of pixels used for shading and texture. So it returned to its roots, so to speak. Gillis would remain on the series until the 12th issue, and the final 2 issues were entirely done by the artist, Athanas. So if anyone's keeping count, that's 7 different creators doing 14 issues in total. That's a lot of changes, and the series suffers for it. The ongoing series begins with introducing the artist's underground and the various characters in that movement. This collective is barely developed before it's suddenly broken up, and Shatter becomes involved with another rebellious faction. After a brief conflict that sets up Shatter being on the run, the character is suddenly in the jungle in the middle of a war. He has a new identity and no idea how he got where he is. It's a pretty jarring change that does make sense once the plot is resolved. From there, Shatter escapes to Siberia, where he meets his mother. The series abruptly cuts again, and Shatter is returned to America to confront the evil corporation. Here he encounters a headless Cyan, connected to 100 different heads with 100 different talents. Shatter gets rid of her and assimilates all those RNA traits. At this point, he's basically a god. He goes to arcades to test these new talents. For the final issues, the story wanders and ends on an odd environmental angle. Conceptually, there are a lot of great elements that contribute to a really great story that never emerges. For the most part, it hovers around mediocre and competent. When Gillis returns in issue 4, he begins to evolve the concept and escalate the stakes. The character of Shatter essentially becomes Neo from the Matrix. That is, he can inject talents from others, and after a bit of training to activate those talents, they become a permanent part of his skill set. So you can see his character arc go from being a loser rent-a-cop to an important chess piece for corporate interests, to finally taking control of his destiny and being in a position to change the world. On paper, the character evolves, but really, Shatter is undeveloped and kind of static. He flows from situation to situation like a generic action hero. There's not one characteristic that stands out. Like, as a human being, I can't define him. He's just some guy with a specific ability. I couldn't tell you what he liked, disliked, or wanted to achieve with his life. So, while the concept of what Shatter represents evolves, the actual character doesn't. The reason for that lack of development is pretty obvious. The series was focused on the novelty that gave it attention. Put another way, the plot was used as a showcase for the digital artwork. It was secondary to the main element that got attention. At least, that's how it reads. The artwork itself is fine. Well, it's fine considering the time period and the software available. In any other context, it would be called barely functional. Or if one is being polite, it's primitive. But it wasn't a new revolutionary technique. That wouldn't happen until the hardware and software progressed to a point where screen resolution and color depth achieved print quality. After leaving Shatter, Saenz had an interesting career. Notably, he produced the original graphic novel Crash for Marvel Comics. This time he incorporated computer graphics and the new technology of 3D modeling. Again, it's not a graphic novel that revolutionized comic book production. Before that, in 1986, Saenz developed ComicWorks, a program that has specific tools for creating a comic book page on a Mac. Presumably, this is templates he created while working on Shatter and possibly Crash. The following year, his fascination with expanding artistic expression with computers led him to create the erotic simulator, Mac Playmate. It's a pretty basic thing where you manipulate the avatar, Lola, into playing with herself for your pleasure, I suppose. But this wasn't his only erotic computer game. After establishing the studio, Reactor, they published Virtual Valerie, an even more interactive, role-playing style of game. Apparently, the final boss, so to speak, was to get Valerie to, achieve gratification. This actually had a sequel and a director's cut. Perhaps Reactor's largest success was the CD-ROM game, Spaceship Warlock. It's the type of point-and-click adventure story that was really popular in the early 90s. From what I can tell, Saenz's final comic was Donna Matrix. This self-published piece was created using 3D modeling. That said, like Shatter, it's rather primitive. As is the story. Basically, it's hard-boiled, but with a renegade dominatrix sex robot. It definitely reads like a weird fantasy, and Saenz saying, "I'm the first to make a comic using 3D modeling software. Also, here's a few of my kinks." Again, it's a novelty, with a sleazy edge and no real point. In an interview from that time, Saenz suggested Donna Matrix would become a video game, but that never happened. Perhaps that's for the best. I couldn't determine when Reactor went out of business, or whether it was bought and cannibalized by another company, but it didn't seem to survive the 90s. After which, Saenz appears to have returned to commercial art as his primary occupation. In the end, Shatter has bragging rights to being the first computer-generated comic and the first computer-generated ongoing series. Ironically, the first widely adopted digital aspect of modern comics was computer coloring, which Shatter never utilized. As a final production note, Shatter was collected and published by AIT Planet Lar in 2006. This included the one-shot special in the first 4 issues, but that's it. If Shatter was influential, then its influence is very subtle and not noticeable. I don't think it inspired anyone to buy a computer and spend tedious long hours learning how to draw with a mouse. As mentioned moments ago, computer-generated images for comics wouldn't become more common until much later. The technology needed at least another decade to evolve to a point where it became a tool for expression. However, Shatter was the first tiny step towards digital production. Thank you for watching. Now I should mention that I recently posted a 30-minute video to Patreon. Due to various restrictions on YouTube, I cannot post it here without massive edits. Anyway, it covers the oddball history of strange brain parts before I focused on comics. There is tons of air quotes lost media, a few full videos, and behind the scenes information that elaborates on how this channel evolved. So if that's your thing, support this channel on Patreon and get the backstory to strange brain parts. It's probably weirder than you might think. Of course, thanks to all my current supporters on Patreon and YouTube. I greatly appreciate your ongoing support. It makes a big difference, believe me. You make it possible for this channel to continue on a regular basis, so thank you once again. Extra special thanks to Andrew Barton, Chapel Pluto, Constant Disappointment Records, Corey Drew, Edward Clayton Andrew, Francis De La Cruz, Green Man, James Graham, Jeff Nicholson, John Gaunt, John Nyukes, John Woolham, Matt Marino, Odin Ashcroft, Phil Sagan, Plutocracy, Ruby St. Dennis, Russell Bull, Shad Miller, Sickan, Spencer Estes, and Tom Granis. You are all justified and ancient.